Coming up next is our session on virtual reality, and I'll tell you a little bit about the formation of this. When we were designing the programming and designing the conversation, one of the things that stood out, and obviously we've had an amazing partnership with Oculus VR this year. Very happy to have them here with us. I hope some of you got a chance to do the demos. We had demos with us all of last week, and today we're going to talk a little bit about what is the transferability of the technology as we're able to play and move and weave the technology of virtual reality from gaming and into film. Starting us off, or leading our conversation this morning, is James Stewart. And James is the founder of the Geneva Film Company, which has produced over 25 projects in digital 3D. He is a director, a storyteller, an artist, a digital innovator, a multi-platform visual designer, with works ranging from mobile to giant screen, from motion graphics to stereoscopic. And in particular, I just wanted to shout out the 3D film Foxed, which I saw, and it was lovely, it was amazing. He's also done work for the Ontario 4D at the Vancouver Olympics, and for Werner Herzog's acclaimed Cave of Forgotten Dreams in 3D. He is one of Toronto's foremost experts on 3D, and he's going to lead off this session on Beyond the Screen, Future is Made of Virtual Reality. I hope you guys got the, futures made of, right? Yeah? Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so without further ado, please help me welcome James Stewart and our panel on Beyond the Screen.
Thank you very much. Okay, I know there's been a lot going on at TIFF, and don't worry, you're in the right place this morning. We have a great panel here for you. We're going to talk about what's next. We're not going to talk about anything in the present tense. So we have Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus Rift, beside me, the creator and designer of the Rift. He also has the world's largest collection of VR headsets, so during the Q&A you can ask him about that. We have, beside Palmer, we have Jade Raymond, Managing Director of Ubisoft Toronto. She came to Toronto from Montreal. She built the team here up to 800 employees. She is known for Assassin's Creed Unity, Far Cry 4. She was the co-creator and executive producer of Assassin's Creed. Ubisoft's best-selling franchise has sold over 76 million copies. Beside her is Ariel Garten, co-founder, CEO of Interactivity. They have a new product which is a wearable. It's called the Muse. It is a brain-sensing headband. She studied neuroscience. She has a different perspective than some of the others on the panel. She studied neuroscience. She is a psychotherapist. She's also a fashion designer. Her work has appeared at Fashion Week in Toronto as well as the AGO. And she is creating NeuroWear for the future. And finally, beside her is Felix Lejeunesse. He has a studio in Montreal called Felix and Paul Studios. As you might guess, his partner is Paul Raphael. They founded the studio in Toronto. They've done extensive work in stereoscopic 3D films, multimedia installations, and commercials that have shown worldwide. He's also a director and director of photography. And recently, they created the content for the launch of the Samsung Gear VR, which is the Samsung version of Oculus. Please welcome our panel. So I'm going to start with you, Palmer. Tell us a little bit about what is happening now and what's happening in the future with Oculus. Actually, before you answer that, let me just ask the audience. How many here have tried on the Oculus Rift? Fantastic, good audience. How many in the audience here are filmmakers? Okay, that's great. How many would consider themselves gamers? Okay, that's great. How many in the audience are women? Fantastic. Even some of the men raised there. And the rest, I'm assuming, are men. Outstanding. I'm very proud that in what would normally be a real geek fest, we actually have 50% of the panel is women. We're very excited about that.
It is a geek fest and they're women.
That's right. The geekettes. Okay, back to you, Palmer. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with Oculus.
Okay. So we stopped shipping DK1 development kits last year. We shipped about 55,000 of those. We're up to somewhere between, I think we're something like 65,000 DK2 orders at this point. We're shipping those out to developers around the world. We've been working with a lot of partners on content, including Felix and Paul. The Samsung, the Gear VR was actually a partnership with Oculus, so it's powered by our software and platform, and a lot of our technology and the sensor and the firmware was mostly designed by Oculus in conjunction with Samsung. So I guess right now we're just continuing to push forward with developers and trying to get VR hardware in the hands of as many people as possible and pushing towards an eventual consumer launch of what we hope will be mass market consumer virtual reality.
Okay, that's fantastic. So you have over 100,000 developer kits out there. When is it going to be?
Ordered.
What's that?
Ordered. We're still working on shipping the DK2s. We're halfway there.
Okay, so once those are all out in the market, when are we going to see it on the shelves as a consumer platform?
We have nothing to announce at this time. Sorry.
Okay, under a year
really
or
am.
over a year?
I can't say. I
Okay.
really am sorry. I'm sorry
That's good. Fantastic.
about that.
All right, so Jay, tell us a little bit, give us an update, what's going on at Ubisoft and how you guys are telling stories.
So Ubisoft Toronto is working on 5 projects right now. A couple of them are coming out soon. So you mentioned them, Assassin's Creed Unity and Far Cry. And then we have some unannounced projects. And what's really exciting to me coming at this from a gaming angle, and the reason why I'm in the gaming industry, is the gaming industry hasn't settled on a single formula for what a game is. What a game is has been continuously evolving and at a rapid pace for the last 20 years, you know, from people who remember things that you would play in the arcade or, you know, Miss Pac-Man, to these days fully immersive experiences, and even, you know, newer experiences that are very narratively focused, probably close to what filmmakers would create. I think in terms of what Telltale is doing with episodic content is really interesting in terms of, you know, a game that is that has the interactivity but is very much story-driven. And I'm personally really excited about where we are right now in games because I think with VR very much being on the cusp of, you know, being a real thing finally, as well as wearable things, which I own 1 million of them. I'm a super nerd about those. I think that, you know, what a game is and what interactive entertainment is going to undergo another huge evolution. And I was actually talking about this recently at a conference in Spain and Barcelona. And so, you know, I'm really excited about defining what these entertainment experiences are, and so are a lot of people at the studio. So we don't have anything to announce specifically, but we have a lot of people thinking about it.
Okay, that's fantastic. So Ariel, tell us a little bit about Muse. I've tried it on. It's absolutely amazing from a wearable point of view. I was in Japan last year, and there's crazy wearable things going on. You can get cat ears that move when you're excited, and there's a tail that wags. You can wag the dog. You can actually wag the dog. And tell us a little bit about Muse. When is it available, and how does it work, just for everyone?
Sure. So Muse, the brain sensing headband, is the thing that I'm wearing. It's a slim little brain sensor, so it tracks your brain activity in real time and sends it to your smartphone or your tablet. So you can actually see what's going on inside your mind. The application that it comes with is Muse Calm, and it teaches you to manage your mental state. So it gives you exercises to help you improve your attention, potentially working memory, and help you decrease your stress. So when we look at the world of wearables, we have things that help you track your sleep and help you track your steps. This is something that helps you actually track and improve your own mind. When we look at this from a gaming perspective and from an interactivities perspective, it can also be used as a tool to input into your games or your applications. I don't know if anybody remembers a big project we did at the Olympics where people in Vancouver could control the lights in the CN Tower, Canadian Parliament buildings, and Niagara Falls with their minds from across the country. So once you start controlling big things 1,800 feet in the sky, it also kind of demonstrates where you might go in a virtual world, or where you might go with an RC-controlled car, or where you can take it when you put a character inside of a narrative. So that's the wonderful world of Muse.
Very cool. And Felix, tell us a little bit about the studio. So Felix has this incredible studio in Montreal. And just tell us about some of the projects you've done and what you're currently doing, and tell us about the Samsung launch and how that went.
Sure. I mean, just a note, we come from a traditional filmmaking and storytelling background, and we kind of became obsessed with the idea of immersion and presence in cinema for a couple of years, and we created the tools to empower ourselves as filmmakers to be able to explore that new space. So that's why we founded that studio, basically more or less at the time that Oculus released the DK1. So we created a 3D stereoscopy, 360-degree way to basically capture reality, more or less. And so our studio is both technology, but it's really about technology and content creation, basically. So we are directors and screenwriters working full-time into live-action virtual reality, and we're developing projects in the entertainment world, in the cinema world, in the music world, and now also in the education and health world. And recently we released the introduction to virtual reality experience that will be the opening content that you will see when you launch the virtual reality application on the Gear VR, the Samsung Gear VR that was recently announced. So it's a really exciting time for us. So.
Okay, that's great. So first question is kind of a broad question, and I'll throw it to you, Palmer, and you guys can jump in if you want. As a filmmaker, why should I care about VR?
I'm not a filmmaker. Ask him.
No, I'm a filmmaker, and so why should I care about VR? Like, why is VR now? Like, what's the importance of it? If I'm a storyteller, let's say more broad term.
I think that virtual reality is the first medium, maybe in forever. It's the only medium that theoretically allows you to experience anything. And I'm not talking about VR as it exists today, or as it will exist next year. It's going to be a long road. But the question isn't when will virtual reality be good enough to tell the story I want to tell. It's not if it will. It's when it will. So if you have a medium that lets you tell any story any way from any viewpoint, I feel like that's a powerful tool that people haven't had access to until now.
So why is virtual reality better than reality?
I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Well, I know,
but at least not yet.
I don't walk around the room going, wow, look at this, I can look 360, this is unbelievable. But when you put the headset on, you can't believe that you can actually control the imagery with your head.
Sure, but you also, most movie sets, you wouldn't walk around and be like, oh my God, it's amazing, it's a room with no ceiling. But it's what you do with that space and the stories that you tell inside of that space that make people pay attention. And it's the same thing with virtual reality. If you just use it as a gimmick, oh, you're not in the real world, but here's this place that looks like the real world. Woo! It's not going to impress people. But if you use it as a tool to tell a story or to give someone an experience, then I think that's what's going to hold their interest, especially for things that are not possible in the real world. Ever since the dawn of time, people have been telling stories about impossible things, doing impossible things. And I think that movies are kind of one of the latest ways that we experience that, along with games. People don't play games to do what they do in their everyday lives. They want to be, pirates or space pilots or something that they can't normally do. And I think VR allows you to do those things a lot more convincingly.
Okay, that's great. We've done a lot of projects. I'm often asked to do new technology storytelling. So we did a gesture-controlled game that ran in cinemas in stereoscopic 3D for Samsung, so people could move things around. And the challenge is always how do you tell the story you want to tell, and how are you getting there? And in the film world, call it film, like the linear storytelling world of movies, it's now all going cross-platform, as we know. So it's mobile, tablet, and all kinds of things. But this is not cross-platform. This is the next platform. So Jade, how is it from a filmmaker point of view? How is it important to use new technology to tell stories? And you guys are doing it in gaming, which is definitely non-linear.
Again, I'm not a filmmaker, but in terms of, from my perspective, as coming from the game development background, that's all I've ever done in my career. It's not really about telling a story. It's about setting up a world and a context and sets of rules and to enable other people to live out their own story. And to me, in terms of the future of games and interactive entertainment, that's really what you need to focus on in the future. So I think if you think of maybe novels, which are obviously very story-based, I think, Lord of the Rings or, any, I guess, any kind of the, I think, I guess the big staying power, the things that have the most potential in my mind are when you create a consistent world and a different world that people can go visit with its own rule sets. And then I think the interesting thing is letting people experiment or create or live out parts of their own story in those worlds. So that would be the shift in my mind. It's thinking of, yes, the world and yes, the characters, but not necessarily the specific story, because when you have interactivity, it's about the agency of the person experiencing it.
And where do you see that evolving to? I mean, there have been non-linear films where, the audience gets to choose, do you go into this store, do you kill this person or not? Where do you see from a storytelling point of view, where do you see gaming evolving to?
Yeah, I don't see it as a choose-your-own-adventure type of thing. Like, to me, that breaks the immersion. Anytime you have, and I know a lot of, for those of you who are gamers, role-playing games like current RPGs still have a lot of that, dialogue boxes and choices, but I don't think that pulls you out of the experience. And the promise of VR, which is what we're talking about today, in my mind, is full immersion. So I don't see those two things working together. It's more about, in terms of, in games, a lot of the, often enemies, but other characters in games are driven by artificial intelligence. And those have always been programmed to create challenges for the players in a dynamic way, with certain rule sets. But I think it's about laying that type of artificial intelligence on top of the environments and other systems that can create an experience and gameplay for people, and have a layer that's watching what the people are doing to create those at the right moment. I guess I'm not sure if for people who are not game developers I'm making any sense right now, but.
Good. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Just really briefly, what you said, where you think that things like dialogue boxes or choose your own adventure can take you out of the game, and you really want full immersion. I think part of that is, even if you're doing impossible things, you still want to present it to the player in as natural of a way as possible. You don't want to have artificial things that remind them, oh, by the way, this isn't real, this is all completely fake.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ariel, how do you tell stories using NeuroWare?
So the entire world of connected devices gives us the opportunity to tell stories in new ways. We have, for the very first time, the ability to learn something about the user and to let the user connect with their character, their avatar in the game, in a way that wasn't previously possible. So using an EEG device, you can, for example, when you're playing a first-person shooter game, wait till the person is actually focused for them to be able to get a good shot. Or you can know something about the viewer's, the game player's state, and then create experiences that surprise the user, because you know when they're really relaxed, so you know when the right moment to present new information to them is, or to scare them. Or you can have the character really feel like it's you because it really knows something about you. So when you think about making immersive experiences, there's kind of nothing more immersive than the game knowing what's going on inside your head. Now, to be really clear, we don't at the moment know what you're thinking. We don't know specifically what's going on inside your head. Right now, what we can read is basic state changes. So we know when you're in a state of arousal. We know when your brain is really active. We know when your brain is relaxed. We know when you're focused. And you can use those basic state changes to drive the character's experience. You can also use it as an input device. So if you're really focused on something in front of you, you could use that focus to drive a car. Or you could use that focus to drive a car better because you know the person's really on task and really there.
Okay, so if I'm wearing it while I'm driving the car, will the brakes work automatically if I fall asleep?
Sure, we can do that in a real car or in a virtual car.
Did you see, I think it was a few years ago, but someone played a game of pinball using their brain to control it?
Yeah, a brain pong, actually.
Okay. Have you guys tried to do that with the Muse?
We haven't done brain pong, but we...
Isn't that a drinking game? Brain pong?
That's beer pong.
Oh, right.
Inversely correlated to your success at brain pong.
So Felix, tell me about storytelling and what's your experience when you are starting a project or pitching a project? How do you decide where you're taking this into new ways of telling stories, new platforms, invented or otherwise?
I mean, I think for me, the biggest discovery with virtual reality is the fact that the emotional response of the viewer watching live action content is fundamentally different than in traditional cinema. For example, one of the first experience that we've exhibited is very simple. It's just an intimate experience where you're sitting with a musician for 8 continuous minutes in a studio and he's playing music. And there is no camera movement, there is no cuts, there is no sense of narrative progression. It's a pure experience of presence. And the emotional response we've got from people, people were reporting a lot about empathy, intimacy, like feeling a real sense of being with that person in the space and having the feeling that they connect to that person in the same way that they would if it was a real person. So that we felt was extremely interesting, and the word empathy and intimacy came out a lot from the people's reaction in that experience. Another thing that we've discovered is that in virtual reality, it's not just about telling a good story as you would on the screen in cinema and trying to figure out the best way to make the story evolve, because the narrative, the emotional response of the viewer will not necessarily follow the same kind of arc that you would like to have in traditional cinema. Like, for example, in virtual reality, there is what we call a surrender point, a moment where you put it on, you get into the experience, and you're still sort of in your real space. You're not completely surrendered to the virtual reality experience, so you're still kind of self-conscious and you're still kind of aware of the environment you are physically in before putting the headset on. And after a while, you can see in the body language of people going like this, kind of sinking into the experience and surrendering to what they are into. And generally, people report that this is like a very high climactic moment for them, even if nothing's really going on story-wise on the screen, you know? So it's a moment where you kind of accept to surrender, and people say that's the best part for them. That's this kind of climatic point. So in general, in a traditional story arc, you would say, well, I'm gonna put my climatic point over there, but it doesn't mean that the viewer will reach the climax at the same time in the story arc, you know, which is a kind of a different mindset. So you need to think of the viewer as really being part of the scene, and it's not just about telling a good story, but it's also about how to really compute the fact that there's a subjectivity that is part of the evolution of the story. And it's not, the subjectivity is not just about the viewer can look anywhere as if it was a 360 camera. It goes much deeper than that. The viewer, you know, like in the same experience that I talked about, the experience with the musician, there's a dog sitting behind. The dog is doing nothing. It's like it's the most uninteresting dog in the history of media. Like it's just lying down, there's no action, but some people will spend the whole 8 minutes just looking at the animal, and they're gonna come out of it and don't pay attention to musician and come out of it and say, oh my God, like this, I was thinking about my youth, I was thinking about my childhood, my dog, and I was so, I went off into my thoughts, and it was so emotionally engaging. And you're like, it's just a dog, you know, sitting there, it's not doing anything, you know. So it's pretty amazing as a storyteller and as a filmmaker to try to understand what's really going on, you know, and how to, and honestly, like with a lot of humility, there's a huge learning curve, like for anyone going in that field, be it us or James Cameron or whoever will go into that space. I think you have to recognize as a filmmaker that you're not doing cinema, you're doing something else, and that something else needs to be sort of built from the ground up. And that, I mean, that's our take on it, basically.
And you know what that makes me really want to do? Slip an EEG on somebody and understand what happens at that surrender point. Yeah. And if you, as the person who's crafting the game, can actually know when the viewer has experienced that surrender point and then use that as triggers to build to the next experience.
That would be great. That would be great.
I think I see a project.
Yeah, me too.
That's good.
So for my next project, we know that there has to be a cinema version, a TV version, some kind of web presence, a game. Does my next project need to have, as I'm writing it, let's say, my next project need to have a VR version, a game version, a stereoscopic version, a NeuroWare version, or should I combine the experience to dabble in all those spaces? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I don't think so. I think that some entertainment properties and some IP and franchises are meant to be on certain media and they're not meant to be in other. And I think that it's kind of a strange approach that we've gotten into in the last few years of thinking everything should be transmedia or whatever the new term is. I think some franchises or intellectual property that are based on a world can be better adapted because it is about the world and the setting and the context of the world. But things that are very focused on a specific climax and a specific story aren't really necessarily going to be well adapted to interactivity, and so therefore, it doesn't make sense to make a game necessarily. So I think, to create compelling content for VR or for film, you have to think of your main media first and be trying, and then if you want to do a second, bring it onto another platform. There has to be a real reason that you as a creator thinks there's something you wanted to say and you weren't able to, or that would be complementary if you brought it to another medium.
I can agree with that and add on that the best games for any platform, whether it's mobile or console or PC, whatever it is, they're generally the ones that were made with that platform in mind, or those controls in mind, or a certain display in mind. So trying to make a game that works across every platform, even though they have different screens, different methods of input, and different levels of horsepower, doesn't really make sense. And I love VR, and I think it's great, but there are types of games that are just not well suited to VR, and those, sure, you could put it on a virtual screen in VR, but there's not really a strong argument to be made for doing that. So there's always going to be all kinds of media that is, not necessarily best experienced in VR. Even traditional films are a good example. A lot of things that are done in traditional films, like cuts and fast pans, don't work well in VR at all. But that doesn't mean the movies are bad, or that movies are no longer good. People are still going to enjoy those movies for a really long time, even if you have VR as this other medium that's emerging.
Yeah, do you think that the technology will drive the storytelling, or the storytelling will drive the technology, and specifically VR?
Well, right now, probably the technology is going to be ahead of the storytelling, just because the tech has so far to go, and it's moving so fast, and it's not realistic to expect content to keep up. Like something we were talking about in the green room was that nobody's really telling long narrative stories in VR yet, because it's only, it takes a long time to put those together. Really, we're just starting to see the beginning of that. So probably for now, it's going to be driven largely by technology, and then storytelling trying to keep up, because it's a really tough nut to crack. It's not obvious how to do things best.
But I think I just want to say something in regards to that. For us, the way we think about it is really the technology evolves generally much faster, exponentially faster, and the storytelling craft and the storytelling learning curve, I would say, is not as exponential and as fast. So in that sense, you might be right about that. But I would say that for us, as a studio who does both technology and content creation, it's like a motto or mission to not just be taken away by just the tech. Like for us, we spent an equal amount of time trying to work on the next iteration of our camera systems and our technology as we spend time into learning how to use it as a storytelling and experiential medium. And we don't want to lose that balance, because we try to make those two curves as sort of parallel as possible, basically.
So as technology people, to some degree, how do you ensure that creators are creating content that does justice to your platform? Because I had that experience in the stereoscopic 3D world over the last decade, where 3D movies took off, and suddenly everybody made 3D movies, and bad 3D movies did a real disservice to the potential of digital, immersive, stereoscopic films. So luckily, good art, artists like Scorsese and Werner Herzog and Wim Wenders made films that took the medium really seriously, but still to this day, every film is being converted because there's an opportunity there. So what are you? I know Ubisoft, you're creating your own content, but certainly, how do we ensure that that creators create content that does justice to your platform?
So one of the first ways is for the creator of the technology to actually create their own content. I know for us, we've been working with brain sensing technology for at least a decade, and we really get how to make compelling experiences. And so we create those, and by doing that, also teach other people. It's also about teaching the user how to properly interact with the technology. So creating the right metaphors, the right intuitive triggers, and setting up that language so that as people come into your developer programs or as storytellers or filmmakers come in and create their own tools or applications, they can do that with the language that you've set up that already kind of sets the parameters and the frameworks. So we're really engaged in helping people tell great stories or create great experiences using the technology. You can't just give somebody a device and say, here, go for it.
And, examples are good, and giving them support is also good. But it's important to note that a lot of times you can only give support when people really want to make things that really push the platform. Like if someone says, hey, I'm trying to do this, I want to do a really good job, and I need help, you definitely want to help them do that. But you mentioned 3D movie conversions. That's an example where, if they're doing something for not because they believe in it artistically, but really because they see it as a way to get more money or to have another our game also has VR support, so we can add that checkbox. No matter how much support you give, if the will to work with people giving you advice isn't there, then it's probably not going to be a very useful effort.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to come at it from a bit of a different angle. In terms of, kind of what's going on in general these days, I think we're in an age of self-expression where everyone really wants to express themselves. If you look at anything from, Nike ID shoes, where people want to design their own instead of buying the one that was done by a designer, or if you think of, travel stories, it used to be written by a journalist, but now what people do is they go check what their friends say, on various blogs or websites about the place they're going to visit. And so that whole approach to things, it's not about a broadcast model anymore. It's about an engagement model and everyone being engaged in the content. And, it depends if, you share my viewpoint or not as film creators, which I think most of the people are here, but if you feel like there's a new way to tell the story where the viewer has a bigger role in that story, I think that's the place where you can create new, unique content in a VR setting, even if it's not all the way interactive to the point of a video game or as systemic as a video game. The difference, as you pointed out, is the viewer agency, that they can, in fact, look around where they want and they might miss the story you're trying to tell. So I think that if you, what you have to come at it from is a perspective where you want to, where you're letting go of the reins a little bit and you have a story to tell or an experience to give where the viewer has much more agency in that story and can come to maybe even their own aha moments, not necessarily the ones you had in mind, and certainly not at exactly the same point you had in mind.
Can I say something about that? For us, I think as filmmakers working with that medium, right now we're not rushing at creating long-form content. We start with short-form content, and it became kind of important for us to figure out the basic rules and the basic DNA of what we're trying to do with that medium. So we've been interfacing with a few cinema studios who are interested into the virtual reality space, and sometimes they come in and ask, let's create, like 2 hours content. And personally, we don't feel ready to go there. We want to create short-form content, and we would rather create like series of short-form content than creating like one super long sort of experience. So I think that you asked at the beginning the question of how to make sure that the technology and leads to good content creation, and that there's a way to sort of creating that dynamic. For us, it also starts from what you said is like as the person who developed the technology, you create your own content too, or you empower other people to do it through a learning process where they kind of join you into your, you know, sort of what you know about the medium. But it's also about starting from shorter pieces for us and trying to define those shorter pieces and then expand from there.
And it's also okay if people make mistakes and create stuff that isn't good. Fundamentally, when you have brand new technologies, we don't have the lockup on what's good. We don't have the lockup on the best way to do it. We have best practices and what we've learned, but you know, it's really important that people take technologies and dream about things that may or may not work, that may or may not be great when they're executed, and we all learn and discover through that process.
So that was my next question. So what's the best experience you've had in VR, and what have you learned from the good and bad? Palmer, you've probably seen more than any of us.
The good and the bad.
What's the best experience? What are some of the really great experiences that exist today in VR, and what have you learned from some of the user-generated stuff that I'm sure people send you?
So I'm lame on this. I try to not play favorites because since I'm the founder of, you know, Oculus, I have to be careful at saying this is my favorite thing. It is the best thing, especially because there's so many things that are out there in the public, yes, but there's also a lot of things being worked on behind the scenes. And you know, a lot of people, they're not ready to show things to the world, it's not necessarily a good thing to encourage people to, you know, leap out and show what they have before it's polished, before it's ready to be seen.
So what are the characteristics of something that's really good?
Characteristics of something good. Right now, the #1 characteristic is that it doesn't make the user sick.
No vomiting.
That's it, and that is something that is tough, and it's going to get better over time, and the technology's already come a very long way. But the reality is that even if you make a VR device that on the hardware level perfectly simulates reality, there's always going to be certain actions and certain content that makes people sick. Like a lot of the camera movement that's going on in modern movies is only bearable because your brain knows that it's on a screen. If your actual viewpoint were being moved like that, you'd become ill in real life. You'd become ill very quickly. So it's very important to keep the limitations of the hardware in mind for now, but even down the road as the hardware, you know, the latency gets nailed and vestibular stimulus gets nailed, you'll still need to be aware of that problem, that people aren't superhuman and they can't experience anything without running into something that millions of years of evolution have trained us to do.
Right, it's interesting because when you run down the street, you're essentially shooting shaky cam, handheld shaky cam, but your brain is stabilizing the images so you don't vomit. And essentially, once you put the Rift on, you're recreating what would be a personal point of view.
Well, it's not just necessarily running down the street, but I'm talking about things like in movies where they'll have you know, a really fast pan to say, oh, look at that thing over there. You know, to pull focus. In VR, you can't necessarily do that. You have to figure out another way to naturally draw the user's view over there. Because if you just spin the entire world around them so that what they need to be looking at is in front of them, they're not going to feel good at all.
It's interesting what Felix said earlier about having an emotional cue somewhere, like a dog saying, I have a border collie, I would love to put him behind, have action out front, and have him just standing there because he's very focused. But he could be an emotional cue that people are drawn to.
Yeah, I think one thing, just to jump on those two last comments, in cinema, it's a lot about controlling the viewer's attention. Like you focus on the eyes of one character, and then you cut on a specific thing, and then there's a large shot, but your focus is on that specific house. Like there's a lot of control of the viewer's attention, and it's very efficient, like traditional cinema, the way it works. With VR, if you start to do that, like I sense that you bore people. Like if you put them into a space, but you try to control their attention too much, I realize that people get kind of bored. Like it starts to feel a little gimmickish. While if you leave them freedom to explore, you can direct their attention here and there, but you leave them freedom, then people sink in more. Like the presence level sort of increases. And that's another thing that we've found out, is not to try to be too efficient with the content and the storytelling, because it does the reverse effect that it would have in film. More efficiency in film would get you, probably the viewer, more engaged in a way. And in VR, it kind of has the reverse effect for us. Yeah.
So what do you guys think is the killer app for VR that's going to get a Rift or other VR into every home? So, you know, Avatar was the killer app for 3D cinema that forced the exhibitors into digital and into 3D as a result. What's the killer app that's going to get, you know, an Oculus Rift experience into every house?
A real-world quality interplanetary communication and play system. I don't know. Why not look out into the future?
Any other thoughts?
I don't have to make it.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to throw it out to audience questions. So I spoke at TED a few years ago, and there was a guy who had, you've probably seen this online, there's a various projection systems whereby you have wearables, but it's a PC and it projects. So we're getting, that was the thought that we could get away from hardware, get away from a screen-based society and actually just, you know, project it on your hand, which is what he does, and you can dial the phone or project it on particles around us, or, you know, where humans could walk around with a wearable experience that is content-based but not screen-based. Where are we going in the next 5-10 years with VR? Where would you like us to go?
Well, it's just, what you're describing sounds more like AR than VR. And the technologies for both are going to, I think, become very similar over time. It may even be identical hardware. You know, the ideas like projecting onto your hand or projecting into the world around you, they're interesting, but physically there's a lot of problems with actually doing it that way. But if you have perfect AR glasses, you can just virtually do it. You know, like the idea of holograms projected on, you know, like you said, particles in space. Well, what does that mean? Are we, you know, projecting into some kind of fog that's coming out of us? Are we using enough power to ignite air in little pixels with lasers or something? I mean, which can be done, just takes immense amount of power. I think that AR and VR are over time going to become very similar technologies, and it's going to become not just about taking people into a virtual world, but maybe bringing elements of that virtual world into the real world.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at it from a content perspective instead of a technology perspective, there are two very different types of experiences. There's one that's targeted at undivided attention, and I think, you know, traditional film that all of us go see is that. And then if you think of other types of things, like let's say a mobile game, or, you know, just having quick interactions on Twitter or whatever, that's targeted at continuous partial attention, which is, you know, the mode in which a lot of us operate, where we're, you know, maybe listening to us on the panel and you're also checking your mail and you might be doing something else at the same time. And in my opinion, VR is very much in the undivided attention category. It's really about creating that full immersion, whereas AR, you know, projecting in the real world is also interesting, but it lends to completely different types of entertainment experiences that are more about the continuous partial attention, where it's there while I'm going about my regular life doing other things. And I think that's other interesting, you know, will lend to other different interesting entertainment experiences, like playing a game in the real world with your real friends and, you know, real world things, but augmented. And there's some stuff going on there too. But I think that's quite different from VR, which is, you know, you very much are 100% immersed somewhere else.
When are we going to see all the Ubisoft games in VR?
I'd hope never. We don't want to see all the Ubisoft games in VR.
Yeah,
they make
that's
everybody
right.
sick.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's a good point. It's like we're going to have to figure out what type of game is the best type of game for a VR experience, and it's not going to be the types of games necessarily that we're playing right now on console for 40 hours at a time, you know, with, you know, driving around quickly and shooting at the same time and stuff like that.
Awesome. Do we have any questions from the audience? I think we have a roaming microphone. Anybody? Stand up if you have a mic. There you go, right there. In the white. Okay, over here. Please stand up and just give your brief question that has a question mark at the end of it.
Okay. I guess my question is, I recently played PT, or the playable teaser that just came out, for a new horror game that's going to be released late. I don't want to really give any spoilers, but there's a point in the playable teaser where you have to use an external mic, and game menu and the game glitches a bunch of times, and it sort of made things really immersive, and it was just kind of terrifying just because the player was not aware of what was going on in the teaser. And I'm just sort of wondering where that's headed, where things are like, I guess external things are being used to move the story forward. And if, you know, because Guillermo del Toro is directing the game that's going to be coming out, and
Along with Kojima.
Yeah, and so I was just wondering, like, where film directors are going to be playing a part in games later on, and are they sort of going to become connected or kind of become the same thing at a certain point, I guess.
Jade, do you want to grab that?
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot as game developers that we can learn from people in the film industry or TV or, you know, who are used to making different kinds of content, you know, even just direct, you know, from a camera perspective, depending on the meeting, from a, you know, story perspective, from creating a mood and setting, from heightening the experience of certain emotions. There's definitely a lot we can learn from people who are experts at different media. So, you know, even on the current game development teams that we have, we bring in writers often from TV and film. We bring in, you know, DPs. We bring in directors because you might not realize it, but we often work with, you know, casts of over hundreds of real actors doing performance capture these days that we bring in, and they're actually doing real performances. And you can't get a good performance out of an actor, as we in the game industry have learned, without a director who actually knows how to work with actors. So, you know, I think that kind of collaboration in maybe a story-based VR experience would definitely become more and more important.
Yeah, that's great. Next question. I think it's at the back there.
Yeah, hi. I did the speech earlier, and I just think that this panel is the opposite of what I was talking about, which is kind of interesting. And I think, Palmer, what you've invented is a really beautiful thing. But I just wondered, is it not kind of terrifying, the idea that we're basically going to be creating these virtual realities before we've dealt with the real life? And how, by Facebook buying you, in the future, we're essentially only going to be connected through these headsets. I guess I was just painting a horror story, but I'm sure it's a beautiful story. But I just wondered whether you are concerned about how more disconnected and detached we're going to become now that these incredibly amazing virtual realities exist.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to run through a few things really fast. First, Facebook buying us or not probably isn't going to be the determining factor in virtual reality taking over society. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen regardless. The other thing to note is that a lot of these fears are kind of along the same lines of science fiction that has featured virtual reality. And it's worth noting that science fiction, you know, is often taking some technological advancement and then using that as something to base a story around. And, you know, it asks the question, if this technology existed, what would happen? And for a story to work, there generally needs to be conflict. And so, you know, nobody's going to make a sci-fi novel where perfect virtual reality exists, but then all of the drama is actually just about like how difficult school is. Like they're going to make it about, oh, look at this terrible conflict that's being created by virtual reality. I think that the real world outcome might be a lot more boring. I don't think anything really terrible is going to happen, and also, you know, about fixing the real world before we do virtual worlds. The same could be said about anything, you know. Should we really be focusing on electric cars before we focus on world hunger? Should we really be focusing on, you know, the latest mobile game when we still haven't solved all kinds of diseases? It's you know, we have to keep working on everything regardless. But I think that more likely than it becoming an isolating technology, it'll actually be a much more connecting technology. Because if you look at the ways that people communicate today, it's largely digital communication. And digital communication is not centered today around a human level of interaction or a meaningful level of interaction. It's centered around convenience and cost. And yeah, those are really the primary factors, convenience and cost, and maybe efficiency. I think that virtual reality allows people to communicate over long distances or short distances in a much more human level than any other kind of digital communication. So like for Facebook, for example, if you're going to compare people talking over Facebook as opposed to potentially being in the same virtual space together and feeling like they're present in the same room, I think it's pretty clear which one should creep us out a lot more. Or, you know, if we're all here tapping on our phones looking at a screen, what's more dystopian, sitting around looking at tiny screens and ignoring everybody in the same room, or actually talking to each other in some fantastic virtual space? I look forward to when we're able to do that.
So why does Facebook care about VR?
You should, I don't necessarily want to speak for them, but I think it's because virtual reality has the potential to be the next big computing platform, or next big content platform, kind of like the web or mobile have evolved into their own platforms, and I think that it's good to be ahead of the curve. If you think that something is going to become very important, it makes sense to get involved sooner, not later.
Okay, next question.
Is it on? Oh,
yeah, there you
hello.
go.
Good morning.
Yes.
So I work in augmented reality. I've been doing that for the past 10 years, which I know is very different. My question to you, and what I was very intrigued by early on, was this notion of, does the technology come first, or is it the storytellers, right? And so for me, it's always been important to try and bring artists and filmmakers in early on so they can help define what that technology is, and by asking them what kind of stories do they want to tell, and then building the technology from that. So my question is, as an industry, how can we make that happen? How can we get artists and filmmakers involved early on so that they can help define the technology?
By having things like open SDKs that are available to everybody. I think Palmer and I probably have the same answer for that.
Yeah, that's helped a lot. That's one of the reasons that we made our dev kits open for everybody to buy, was because we didn't want to try and pick and choose who would be worthy of receiving our blessed hardware. It needed to be open to everyone, so that anyone with an idea, if they have an idea for how they want to tell a story, they should be able to get the hardware and start working on it. I don't think it's even possible for a company working on a technology like this to pick and choose who's going to do a good job ahead of time. Past success does not always indicate future success. The people who made the most successful 3D games were not the people who had made the most successful 2D games always. I think it's going to be a similar thing with virtual reality, so it's important that everyone starts on an even playing field.
And also getting hardware and SDKs out as soon as possible. I know for us, you can go into Indigo right now and buy a Muse headset and use it to help improve your mind, or use the SDK to help build your next game or application.
I think it's also the approach that the creator takes. I think, a lot of people approach, let's say, games as, okay, I have this great TV show, or I have this great script for a movie, and, I also want to make a game, or, a mobile game or something to go along with it. And I don't think that that's how you're going to have the most optimal experience. So I think it comes from the content creator's desire to figure out what the new platform can enable them to do, and want to make something specific for that. I think that's how you're going to get the most compelling experiences. So it really has to come from the person.
Okay, awesome. We're going to wrap it up there. The Muse headband is available at Indigo and at choosemuse.com, and SDKs are shipping, and games are shipping, and Felix is doing cool work that you're going to see everywhere. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, panel.